West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est long, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
Let's talk about President Biden's priorities versus the media's priorities versus the public's priorities. Should they be aligned? Is the White House press corps pressing Biden on the American people's top concerns? And if not, why not? Those questions were brought into stark relief when everyone heard their questions, there's the White House press corps, at Thursday's presidential press conference. The press focused so many questions on immigration and on the filibuster, and there was really widespread criticism of the performance of the journalists in the room, specifically on how their questions ignored problems that Americans really clearly care about. Here's the data from Pew Research earlier this year, showing that front and center on Americans' minds are issues like the economy, the pandemic, unemployment, the scourge of terrorism, and healthcare. So are White House reporters out of sync with the country? I mean, individually, of course, there are outstanding reporters on the beat with lots of great questions. Collectively, though, there were 0 questions asked about the pandemic on Thursday. And as you can see here, a former Obama spokesman called that a ridiculous failure by the press. Overall, 10 reporters were called on. Obviously, lots of others had lots of other questions they wanted to ask. And the press corps doesn't coordinate questions ahead of time. So it's not like there was a single person to blame for any of the missteps or the things that were missing from the press conference. But nevertheless, the lack of questions about the pandemic and the economy was a real shock. This infectious disease doctor told the Washington Post she was almost on the floor, so stunned by the oversight. And this tension extends beyond the press conference. It goes to the overall coverage of the new president and his agenda. From the right, there's obviously nonstop criticism of both Biden and the media, no surprises there. But lately, there's more and more criticism of the media's priorities from progressives and from moderates. There's a perception that Republicans are setting the narrative about the border, for example, and that Biden's getting more questions about the border than the economy as a result. Get Ted Cruz there. Now, obviously, the immigration situation is serious, but this Pelosi aide presumed the reporters didn't ask about the COVID relief law because it's popular. She said because it's popular, it didn't come up. And as Esquire put it, the presser was a reminder for the press to think about who they represent. By all means, the writer said, challenge the president, but on behalf of Americans who are voiceless. Is that where the press is falling down? Why are there so many critiques of Biden coverage right now? Are reporters missing the big picture and the historic nature of Biden's agenda? And if so, why? We're going to speak with press corps insiders and outsiders. ABC's chief Washington correspondent John Carl is standing by. But first, 2 liberal critics of the press corps, starting with Amanda Marcotte. She's a politics writer for Salon and the author of Troll Nation. And Greg Sargent, opinion columnist for the Washington Post, who writes the Plumline blog. He's the author of An Uncivil War. Amanda, you first. What went wrong at Thursday's press conference?
I mean, I think you touched on a lot of it. After weeks of the press corps demanding this press conference, they asked Biden questions about immigration. They asked him if he's going to run in 2024, and they did not ask questions about the sort of things that the American public wants to know about, mainly the pandemic, when it's going to be over, what steps are being taken, how progress is on that, which is what Biden said that he's focused on. It was extremely frustrating because I think that was the information that most of us want the most, and it didn't even come up.
Greg, why did it not come up, you think?
Well, I'd like to go to something you said earlier, which just really, I think, hasn't gotten nearly the attention it deserves, which is that Republicans are setting the agenda on immigration. The press conference was a perfect example of that. The questions, and there's nothing wrong with asking questions about immigration, to be clear. They should be asking about that. But a number of the questions accepted the tacit right-wing frame that a lot of migrants seeking asylum here is inherently a bad thing. Look, there are serious challenges at the border, but they're management ones. The crisis is not the fact that lots and lots of people are seeking asylum. The crisis is what's happening in Central America, what's happening to the migrants themselves, and our failure to adequately manage the effort by these people to seek, exercise their legal right to apply for asylum. Yet in media discussions, all of that is just erased, and all we get is you're seeing a crisis at the border born of large numbers of people trying to apply, and that just ends up distorting the debate and misinforming people.
And now the new Fox narrative is, when will Biden go to the border? Why hasn't he gone there yet? Why isn't he there right now? We're going to hear that every day, by the way, until he takes the trip. That is how right-wing narratives trickle into the rest of the press, and they divert attention. Amanda, what are the broader complaints from the left about coverage of Biden thus far?
I mean, I think one of the biggest problems is exactly what Greg said, which is that the right sets the agenda. They decide that there's a border crisis and they don't want to look into the reasons for it. But more importantly,
But is that Democrats' fault? But is that Democrats' fault, Amanda? They passed this giant bill on a weekend, right? And then Biden went out and held a few press events, trying to get attention for it. But isn't it their fault if they're not working harder to get attention for their priorities?
I mean, I think, the Democrats could always be doing more. They really could, obviously. But I think one of the complaints that the press has is that all these micromanaged presidential photo op situations are happening instead of press conferences. And one of the reasons is Biden knows that if he has a press conference, it's going to be a bunch of questions that are basically from the right-wing agenda that are not about what the American people want. And so, of course, he's going to just do more photo ops and really micromanaged events.
That's interesting. Greg, what are the left's frustrations with media coverage right now?
Well, I think one of the very big ones concerns the war on voting we're seeing across the country from Republicans. There's a huge wave of new voter suppression efforts underway in states. And almost uniformly, the way the press covers this is as a quote-unquote partisan battle. Right? As if there's an equivalence on one side between making it as hard to vote wherever possible, based on zero public rationale of any kind and based on the lie that the election was stolen from Trump, and on the other side, trying to make it as easy to vote as possible. There isn't a midpoint between a fireman and an arsonist, as a clever person remarked on Twitter. And this debate is just constantly distorted as nothing more than two parties equivalently trying to game the system for partisan advantage. But the deep moral and substantive differences between the parties on the underlying issue, should we make it harder to vote based on lies, or should we make it easier to vote so that more people can participate, is just always erased.
And Amanda, do you feel the press has not learned from the Trump years? Are they trying to be performatively tough on Biden in a bid to appear fair in the wake of Trump, when, of course, Trump was such an abnormality, such a liar, that there's no equivalency between the two?
Yeah, I mean, I think the problem isn't being tough on Biden, right? The problem is mistaking coming at Biden with right-wing talking points, often which are based on lies or misinformation, as if that was being tough on Biden. I think there's a lot of things that people actually want to ask President Biden, and it's not being asked because instead we're getting Fox News setting the agenda on immigration and on other subjects like that. I think that there is a way to be tough that actually gets us real answers to the questions that most of us actually have.
I love the way the Esquire story put it. Give voice to the voiceless. That's the opportunity when you're in front of the president. Let's help those folks. And by the way, some of the reporters did that about immigration. I loved when Cecilia Vega at ABC said, I was just at the border talking to these kids. Let me tell you what I heard, Mr. President. Thought that was powerful. Amanda, Greg, thank you both. Now let's hear from someone who's logged hundreds of hours at White House Q&As, ABC's Jonathan Karl, the author of Front Row at the Trump Show, which is back on the bestseller list this week, now that it's out in paperback. So, John, thanks for being on. You were, of course, chief White House correspondent in the Trump years. Now, I just mentioned Cecilia Vega is at the briefing, was at the press conference on Thursday asking questions. There's been so much criticism of these 10 reporters for what they asked and what they didn't ask. How do you see it?
Well, look, you can always second guess the questions that are asked. I mean, as you said, I've been in there many times under 4 different presidents at press conferences. And, you go in there with a list of questions. One of the big things for me when I would go into a press conference is, I would have my, 1 or 2, I really want to do this question. But I was always, worried that, depending on when you're called on, those questions could be asked. So I always went in with a long list. In case the question had already been asked to hit a different subject. There's never a shortage of things to ask a president about. Watching from home, I would have liked to have seen, more questions, certainly questions on COVID. But there were good questions asked. And, you pointed to Cecilia Vega. I think that's incredibly valuable. That is not right-wing talking points. Cecilia had just been at the border. She had just talked to migrants who had come over, including some that said point blank that they had come because they thought they would have better treatment now that Joe Biden was president. That's a legitimate question to put to the president. And I thought that his answer was one of the more interesting moments in that press conference.
It is Monday, the 29th of March of 2021, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner the English Bulldog is our snoozing sous chef. And our daily special is River City Hash Mondays. That's right, it's been a weekend. Much quieter than the previous 4 years. Well, 4 years up until, January something. Lots quieter, and boy, am I glad for that, aren't you? So, nonetheless, it wasn't totally quiet because the former guy, as he is known, continues to continue. And it looks like parts of the press, a big part of the press, want to give him that platform. That's right. Well, that's not the only news out in the world because, Glenn Greenwald is going after an intern. An intern, my God. Well, she is a woman too, so I guess that makes sense to Glenn Greenwald. Yeah, he's all upset because apparently she's using her platform. I think what is called is a job. Yes, she's an intern. But she works at a newspaper. I think it's called the New York Times. According to Glenn, she has a platform. No, she's got a job at a newspaper, Glenn. You have a platform. Okay? But he's accusing her of using her position to go after, I guess, patriots who stormed the Capitol, and now they want to raise money for their legal defense funds. And he thinks that that's bad, that they would be restricted from doing so. Really, Glenn? Yeah, he always protects the right-wing Nazis now. What's up with that? Well, Glenn Greenwald tried to, insult me a bit. Called me a little man. I think he means, that I haven't accomplished much in life compared to him. So I was thinking, well, I guess if Glenn feels that way, I feel pretty good. I was questioning whether I had accomplished anything in my life of substance. And when Glenn Greenwald called me a little man, well, I figured I'd made it. Yeah, well, I don't need Glenn Greenwald to feel that I've accomplished something in my life. But Glenn Greenwald is a snit. He really is. And going after an intern, because now this young woman is going to be harangued, harassed, and probably driven from her job into counseling because these people never quit. And we're supposed to make nice with them. You make nice with them, and what happens? You will be stabbed in the back. Actually, I would argue they would not stab you in the back. They would stab you in the front. That's how cruel and sick they are. Derek Chauvin goes to trial today. I believe that's right. Yeah, today, or maybe opening arguments. So I guess that is the true start of the trial. The jury has been picked and is in place. I'm sure the defense of Derek Chauvin will prove, or try to prove, that keeping his knee on Floyd's neck for, 9 minutes? Until he was dead? Was just, he was doing his job, and you could tell. He didn't think that he was doing anything other than his job. Look how calm he was. He even was rummaging through his pockets while he was strangling the guy with his knee. Because, well, that's what cops do. They're just doing their job. Look how calm he was in the midst of it. Now, other people who don't know, maybe they're from another planet, and they don't know that that's how a cop does his job, might look at that action and go, wow, that guy just murdered that other guy. So I would think, that the defense has a pretty hard road to hoe, so to speak. Though when it comes to cops, yep, they usually get the benefit of the doubt. Oh, he was just working. If he was trying to murder the guy, you think he would have looked like wild-eyed. He was so calm, just rummaging through his pockets. Yeah, the guy's a psychopath. That was sick. And I actually will argue that there was something more going on between those two. Since they both worked at the same bar, club, and Chauvin was stuck outside because he was such a dick, and George Floyd was inside because he was a big guy, but he was a lot nicer and treated people with humanity. And for that, Derek Chauvin had to kill George Floyd, because George Floyd, a black man, was in a better position than Chauvin, the white man. Yeah, that's what I would argue. Whether we'd go anywhere, I don't know, but I really think there was something going on from their time working together. Okay, so that trial will be underway. I'm sure the local authorities will call out SWAT when the jury comes back with their verdict, because they have to call out SWAT, because the jury will probably let Chauvin go. It'll be like Rodney King all over again. Can't we all just get along? No, not when you got Nazis doing their thing. Do not make nice with Nazis. Nazis need to be punched, and often. Look what's happening in Georgia. Yeah, a bunch of racist Nazis, and old Kemp there's whining. Don't call me a racist. Oh yeah, right. The people that whine the most about being called racist are racists. They always whine about it. Everybody else, you just know, yeah, I'm anti-racist, but, there's no such thing as not being racist. You can be anti-racist. And Kemp is whining, I'm not a racist. There's no such thing as being a racist. Just don't tell him as, part of the 1619 Project. Then they'll totally go racist on you. Got to avoid that, really. It could be dangerous to your existence. Speaking of dangerous to our existence, it looks like maybe the Evergreen shipping container ship, I think they called it I can't remember what they named the ship. It's something weird. Ever Given. That's it. Ever Given. Yeah, if you ever given me that thing again. It looks like it's partially floated and allowing ship traffic to go through, is from what I last heard. Though I did see some, what I think is the most recent, and they've completely freed it. Because when they said it was partially floated, that means it's still partially stuck. But apparently they were able to rotate the ship enough so that ship traffic can get by. And I actually think that maybe it is floating free now. At least that's what I understood when I saw some clips that looks like they were the most recent, because the other ones, when they had given a thumbs up and praised God, that was when it was just still partially stuck. They called it partially floated, but that's positive thinking for you. Okay, you don't need to be a pessimist to know that when someone says it's partially floated, it's also partially stuck, just so we're clear. But maybe billions of dollars a day in ship traffic can come back, and the world economy can balance itself. And who knew that a skinny little canal like the Suez could disrupt the world economy? Well, somebody knew, because maybe that ship wasn't so run aground by accident. Knowing how much online and wireless communications in terms of navigation take place with ship traffic anymore. Could the ship's controls have been hacked? Could that have been possible? Now, the bridge said that they had run out of power and drifted that way. Does the Suez Canal have that much of a current? I'm wondering. Okay, well, looks like we're going to get our IKEA room dividers and other things that are totally difficult to build with one-of-a-kind parts. Yeah, so we'll be able to get back to that. And, I actually asked, I'll come and pick up the item there, but they never got back to me. And now, apparently, the container ship is free and we'll get our goods as we were promised. Okay, enough of that rigmarole. What's on the rest of the menu here on this fine Monday, River City Hash Mondays? Well, at the top, yeah, they broke it down there at the top, didn't they? Uh-huh. How the White House press corps is woefully out of sync with the country. Woefully. On the rest of the menu, a GOP lawyer who advised Trump on his campaign to overturn the 2020 election is now playing a central role in the Republican effort to suppress voting around the nation. I know that was wordy, but I had to get it out. The average price of a gallon of gas jumped a nickel to $2.94 2 weeks after OPEC announced a decrease in production, just as we all predicted. Because if you know OPEC, this is what they do. It takes about 2 weeks, and then you see it. Yeah, it's not because of Biden's economic plans. That's what I've been hearing in the right-wing press. Gas is going up because of Joe Biden. No, gas is going up because OPEC and Russia decreased their production. Okay? Supply and demand. Wake up. And Brian Rohan, the San Francisco dope lawyer to the stars, has died at age 84. After the break, we move to the chef's table, where a global data study reported that China generated over half of the world's coal-fired power in last year, for all of last year, 2020. And the Sudanese government signed a peace agreement with a major rebel group that establishes, now wait for it, a separation of religion and state. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. Homepage at netrootsradio.com. To the right of the page is our chat room link, and the chat room is monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly. If you would then take a look across the page to the left, near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, there is the link to our Patreon site. And if you could become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio, and if you could afford to send us the equivalent of what you might spend on an espresso-type coffee drink once a month, if you could send those funds to us, well, we combine it with what we pull out of our own wallets, and then we pay our bills, fly under the radar, continue this resistance broadcasting as we've done for the last 10 years. That's right. Woohoo! Happy birthday to us. 10 years of resistance broadcasting, 24/7, 365. Also, as a side note, I want to thank all of you who reached out and wished me a happy birthday, which occurred for me on the 26th, which was Friday. Indeed. So thank you for those birthday wishes. It was, well, I liked it. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, do so at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of that. Thank you, Tom. Follow me on Twitter at Justice Putnam because, well, I post the show notes and links diary on Daily Codes about 10 minutes before showtime, and then I get that linked up on Twitter and other social media platforms, and you know who those others are. So follow me on Twitter at Justice Putnam. You can also follow the show on Twitter at Cookbook West. And please do pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, and wherever podcasts can be found. And they're everywhere. They are. This first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Oh, yeah, it's River City Hash Mondays. Did you know? Yes, you do. Is by Nicholas Riccardi out of the Associated Press. A GOP lawyer who advised former President Donald Trump on his campaign to overturn the 2020 election results is now playing a central role coordinating the Republican effort to tighten voting laws around the country. Tighten? Getting rid of them. Cleta Mitchell. Cleta. A longtime Republican lawyer and advocate for conservative causes was among the Trump advisors on a January phone call in which Trump asked Georgia election officials to find enough votes to declare him the winner of the battleground state. Yeah, find me the votes. And she was on the phone call, and she's not disbarred. Now Mitchell has taken the helm of two separate efforts to push for tighter state voting laws and to fight Democratic efforts to expand access to the ballot at the federal level because Nazis hate voting, especially when it doesn't go their way. She is also advising state lawmakers crafting the voting restriction proposals, and she said on Friday she is in regular contact with Trump. Oh! So you're admitting to the conspiracy. People are actually interested in getting involved, and we have to harness all this energy, Mitchell said in an interview. There are lots of groups that have projects on election integrity that never did before. Really? Election integrity? What is that? Nazis keeping everybody else from voting, especially when it doesn't go the Nazi way? Mitchell's new prominence tightens the ties between the former president, who has falsely insisted he lost the election due to fraud, and the GOP-led state voting overhaul that has helped turn a foundational principle of democracy into a partisan battleground. You know, Democratic lawmakers want people to vote, and Republicans just want unfettered power. We don't want voting. Trump's false claims of fraud have fueled a wave of new voting restrictions because they need any excuse, and they got a big one. It's called the big lie. More than 250 proposed voting restrictions have been proposed this year by Republican lawmakers. And that's according to the Brennan Center for Justice. Mitchell has a long history in the conservative movement with positions on the boards of the NRA and the Bradley Foundation. She represented Trump's EPA chief, Scott Pruitt, who has been the campaign attorney for several Republican senators. She is also chair of the Public Interest Legal Foundation, a conservative election law project that she said may get involved in litigation against H.R. 1 should it pass, or in support of new laws like the one in Georgia. staff at the Associated Press bring us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. The average U.S. price of regular grade gasoline jumped a nickel per gallon over the past 2 weeks to $2.94. You know, exactly 2 weeks after we announced or reported that OPEC, along with Russia, had made an agreement to decrease production so they could drive up the price like they always do. Yeah, it takes about 2 weeks for it to hit, the money train there, and now it's gone up. Industry analyst Trilby Lundberg of the Lundberg Survey said that the price at the pump might be near its peak as gasoline supply evens out across the country. The price of gas has spiked 77 cents per gallon since November 20th and is at the highest point since May of 2019. The highest average price in the nation right now is $3.94 a gallon in the San Francisco Bay Area, and the lowest average is $2.54 in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. The average price of diesel also went up 5 cents over the same period to $3.14. Even more staff at the Associated Press bring us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, River City Hash Mondays. Brian Rohan, who was known as San Francisco's dope lawyer for 1960s counterculture clients like the Grateful Dead and Ken Kesey, has died. He was 84. Rohan's daughter, Kathleen Jolson, told the San Francisco Chronicle that her father died last Tuesday at his home in the Bay Area city of Larkspur after a 6-year battle with cancer. After defending Kesey, author of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, I should also add, a much better book might be sometimes a great notion, just letting you know. And he had defended Kesey for pot possession in 1965. Rohan then became the go-to attorney for illegal drug charges. Rohan co-founded the Haight-Ashbury Legal Organization, and the group recruited clients in part by setting up a table outside the Grateful Dead house at 710 Ashbury Street. Thanks to his association with the Grateful Dead, Rohan also became a music lawyer. In 1966, he helped the band negotiate its first contract with Warner Brothers. He also represented Janis Joplin, Santana, and Jefferson Airplane. His non-musician clients included beat writer Neil Cassidy and members of the Merry Pranksters, the communal travelers chronicled in Tom Wolfe's 1968 book, The Electric Kool-Aid Acid Test. You know you're either on the bus or you're off the bus. Brian Rohan, though he is probably one of the most successful of the dope lawyers, hasn't worn a suit in a year, his usual attire being faded corduroys and a t-shirt. The San Francisco Examiner wrote in a 1970 story, he wears dark glasses at all times. I can't look people in the eye when I ask for all that money. I get it, and it's insane, he said. Rohan spent his entire life on the West Coast, growing up in Washington State before attending the University of Oregon in Eugene, and then the University of California Hastings College of Law, which is in Berkeley. Rohan is survived by Jolson and sons Brian Rohan Jr., Chris Ray Rohan, and Michael Rohan. And Jolson told the Chronicle he died in his sleep. He worked until the last day of his life, she said, clutching his phone in one hand and his iPad in the other. He fought for his clients, he fought for his friends, and he fought for what he thought was right. Rest in peace. Well, that brings us to our break, and when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we have curated for you today. You're listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Clinton Johnston. This week, long live the Queen King. After directing television and documentaries, celebrated actor Regina King has made her feature film directorial debut, and what a debut it is. One Night in Miami is writer Kemp Powers' adaptation of his award-winning play, a fictional account of a real-life 1964 meeting between, get this, Sam Cooke, Jim Brown, Muhammad Ali, and Malcolm X. It's the evening after Ali beats Sonny Liston to become the heavyweight champ, when Brown is starting his acting career, and when Malcolm X is planning his Hajj to Mecca and his departure from the Nation of Islam. And if all that means nothing to you, then this movie may not be your jam. Zone out for the next minute and a half. Oh, and by the way, black movies matter. This film sees King not only as a director who can work with actors, but also as a director who benefits from her sensibilities as an actor. First, she trusted Powers and his script. As such, the heart of the film is built from 3 long scenes in one location each, with pretty much just the 4 principles. That means it's acting time. No effects, no quick moments, or action sequences, nowhere to run to, nowhere to hide. You just have to be right with your characters, and what characters they are. I was surprised at just how accessible these giants were. Eli Gorey, my man Aldous Hodge, Kingsley Ben-Adir, and Leslie Odom Jr., who has snagged 2 Oscar nominations from this flick, gently stepped these figures down from their pedestals without sacrificing their greatness. And though I was thrown at first, I grew to appreciate peeking into a private space where these men could both hold themselves up and hold each other to account as their greater civic stakes entwined with their personal ones. That accessibility is all due to King, who challenged her actors to find the vulnerability in these now near mythic figures. Says King, One Night in Miami is, quote, a quiet film, but it's loud as far as the subject matter. And in her hands, that combination proves to be moving and powerful. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Clinton Johnston. Catch up with us at TakeTwoMovieReview.com and feed us back on our channel on YouTube.
Welcome to COVID Quickly, a new Scientific American podcast series.
This is your fast track update on the COVID pandemic. We bring you up to speed on the science behind the most urgent questions about the virus and the disease. We demystify the research, and we help you understand what it really means.
I'm Tanya Lewis.
I'm Josh Fishman.
And we're Scientific American's senior health editors. Today, we're going to be talking about the barriers Black and Latino people face in getting COVID vaccines.
How your immune system strikes back against coronavirus variants.
And what the heck is going on with the AstraZeneca vaccine?
The pace of COVID vaccinations is picking up in the U.S. More than 87 million people have gotten at least 1 dose. Still, communities hit hardest by the disease are getting left behind. Who are they, and what's the trouble?
It's true that states are opening up vaccination to more and more people, but Black and Latino people are still getting vaccinated at lower rates than white and Asian people, despite getting sick and dying at higher numbers from COVID.
I know you did some reporting on this with our colleague, graphics editor Amanda Montañez. What states did you look at?
So we broke down the data for 5 populous states with some of the worst COVID outbreaks: California, Texas, Florida, New York, and Illinois. The data show that Latino people had some of the lowest vaccination rates proportional to their share of the population, especially in California and Texas. Black people in New York, Illinois, and Florida are also getting vaccinated at notably lower levels.
What's behind those trends? What's the reason for them?
Well, many states have age minimums for vaccination, but Black people have a shorter life expectancy than white people on the whole, so they are at higher risk of dying before they even reach the age cutoff. And many Black and Latino households are less likely to have high-speed internet and the time to spend online booking appointments. They're also less likely to own a car or be able to get to the vaccination sites. Language barriers and ID requirements also make it harder for some people to get their shots. Finally, vaccine hesitancy plays a role in some communities of color for legitimate reasons, but more and more of those people are now willing to get a vaccine. The government and health departments could make it easier by lowering some age barriers, helping those most at risk make and get their appointments, and opening more community clinics. People are worried about all these new coronavirus variants with mutations, thinking that they might evade the new vaccines. But you've found out that our bodies may have some countermeasures, right?
Right. We've all heard by now about the variants popping up that are more infectious than the original. Well, it turns out your virus-fighting cells may be evolving to keep up with them. Several teams of immunologists have been looking at people who were infected with the virus early in the pandemic. These people have antibodies against that early version of the virus. But, and this is really fascinating, the people also have reserve armies of immune cells. 6 months later, these armies have mutated a little bit. They now churn out antibodies that are shaped a bit differently. Some of them seem to be a better fit for the new variants. In test tubes, those antibodies neutralize the newer virus versions. Essentially, the immune system is trying to get ahead of the virus, says Michelle Nuzensweig, an immunologist at Rockefeller University in New York, who did some of this work. Monique Brulette, one of our writers, learned that researchers are trying to figure out if the body makes enough of these reserves to knock down a variant infection completely. They don't know yet, but it's encouraging to think that our bodies aren't just sitting around, but actively trying to come up with new antivirus weapons. Why is there so much controversy over the AstraZeneca vaccine? It's been approved in Europe, but not yet in the US. I keep hearing about side effects and questions about how effective it is. What should we know?
Last week, there were concerns that the vaccine may have been linked to blood clots, but the European Medicines Agency, Europe's FDA, concluded that it is safe and effective, and the benefits outweigh the risks. And AstraZeneca has had some self-imposed problems too. Earlier this week, the company put out a press release saying that the vaccine was 78% effective at preventing COVID in a U.S. trial. But then, in a highly unusual statement, a committee of scientists that was monitoring the trial put out a letter saying it was concerned that the company was using outdated results and suggesting that the efficacy might actually be lower. Then on Wednesday, AstraZeneca put out another statement based on more recent results that showed its vaccine is 76% effective, and it protects against severe disease. That is all very good, so it seems to be more of a communication issue than a science one. Right now, Americans have access to 3 other vaccines, but AstraZeneca's could still be hugely important for the rest of the world. Now you're up to speed. Thanks for joining us.
Come back in 2 weeks for the next episode of COVID Quickly, and check out SciAm.com for updated and in-depth COVID news.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
Could giving food or water to a 92-year-old standing in a line for hours under the hot sun waiting to vote be a crime? I'm Bill Newman, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute. And yes, in Georgia, offering food or water to anyone on a line to vote is a crime, thanks to a new just-passed 95-page voter suppression law, which establishes new rigid voter identification requirements for absentee ballots, a requirement that will prevent many people who need to vote absentee or by mail from voting at all, and will dramatically reduce the number of drop boxes. For example, in a majority-minority district on the outskirts of Atlanta, from 33 to 9. The most outrageous part, there is no basis for any of this. In 2020, Georgia held a completely full and fair, safe and secure election. The votes were counted and recounted twice by hand, and the totals were the same every time. But the results were unacceptable to those in power, so rather than trying to change minds, they're changing the rules. And not only in Georgia, frighteningly, in many other states too. There's an urgent need to pass federal legislation to restore and protect voting rights. The For the People Act, which has passed the House of Representatives, would do that, but the bill faces a filibuster in the Senate. Overcoming the filibuster threat and passing voter protection legislation is critical. The future of democracy, or not, hangs in the balance. The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the ACLU, because freedom can't protect itself.
Hey you, get away from those polling places. We don't want your kind here. Scram! That's a stupid, shameful, and ultimately self-defeating political message, yet it's being pushed as the official anti-voter electoral strategy of Republicans. Admitting that they can't get majorities to vote for their collection of corporate lackeys, conspiracy theorists, and bigoted old white guys, the GOP hierarchy's great hope is to shove as many Democratic voters as possible out of our elections. They're banking on a blitz of bureaucratic bills they're now trying to ram through nearly every state legislature to intimidate, divert, and otherwise deny eligible voters their most fundamental democratic right. Their main targets are people of color, but they're also pushing to keep students, senior citizens, union households, and poor communities from voting. Unable to come up with any actual need for these autocratic restraints, the GOP vote thieves are fraudulently exclaiming that millions of illegal immigrants, dead people, Chinese, and even pets are voting. These absurd claims have been thoroughly investigated, even by Republican judges, committees, media, etc., and repeatedly they've been proven to be, well, absurd. Let's be blunt. You're more likely to find Bigfoot than you are to find a case of mass vote fraud in America. Even some GOP politicos have quit pretending that they're searching for the big cheat, instead bluntly making an overt right-wing ideological argument for subverting democracy. Everybody shouldn't be voting, explained Representative John Kavanaugh, the Republican chair of Arizona's election committee. Slipping deeper into doctrinaire doo-doo, he asserts that it's not just the number of votes that should matter in an election. We have to look at the quality of the votes, too. This is Jim Hightower saying, I'm guessing that most Democratic voters would fall into his low-quality category. The Hightower Radio Lowdown is brought to you by our new Lowdown Happy Hour, now live streaming on Facebook from the Chat and Chew Cafe, with kick-ass political spark plugs like Beto O'Rourke, musical champions like Marcia Ball, and grassroots change makers like the New Georgia Project and People's Action. The Lowdown Happy Hour is reaching out to you to help put the move in movement. So grab a libation and join the fun. Details at hightowerlowdown.org.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1937. That was the day the U.S. Supreme Court issued its ruling on the case West Coast Hotel versus Parrish. The ruling upheld a progressive-era Washington state law that established minimum wages for women. An example of protective legislation, it intended to guard health, safety, and morals of women workers. Elsie Parrish had been a chambermaid at the Cascadian Hotel in Wenatchee, Washington until 1935. She sued and won at the state level after she was paid far below the state's minimum wage. The parent company, West Coast Hotel, appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court. They argued the progressive-era law violated the constitutional right of individuals to freely contract with one another. This interpretation was common during the court's Lochner era. The 1905 Lochner v. New York ruling against maximum hours for bakers ushered in a period of anti-labor Supreme Court rulings. Parrish is considered the landmark case that brought an end to that era. The court argued that the Constitution does not speak of freedom of contract and added, quote, the exploitation of a class of workers who are in an unequal position with respect to bargaining power is not only detrimental to their health and well-being, but casts a direct burden for their support upon the community. What these workers lose in wages, the taxpayers are called upon to pay. The case is also considered instrumental in the switch in time to save 9. It was a reference to Justice Owen Roberts' surprising shift in favor of Parrish. This occurred just as President Roosevelt finalized plans to increase the number of Supreme Court justices to 15. Though Parrish did not overturn Lochner, it did mark a period of pro-labor rulings. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy River City Hash Mondays. We always begin, weather from around the world, along the banks of the Rogue River, in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 34 degrees Fahrenheit. Expecting a high of only the low to mid-50s, probably more in the low 50s. Looks like we'll be partly cloudy, winds out of the north-northeast at 5 to 10 miles per hour. We did have a marked change in the weather over the weekend. We were bumping around 70, and then last night the forecast said, oh, guess what? We're having a little storm coming in. And it did. It dropped the temperature over 25 degrees. And we did get a spot of rain overnight, though it looked like it possibly had a little bit of freezing quality to it. It has dried out. It has melted to its more liquid state. And the rain has stopped falling. And in the midst of all that, also, yesterday we did have some winds that were between 10 and 20 miles per hour with gusts over 50, which then broke a sizable limb from the mock plum tree I have out in the front of the yard. And if my dear elderly mom had been sitting on the porch swing. It's not actually a porch swing. It's one of those swing contraptions that you can sit out in the yard. And if she had been laying on that, she sometimes takes a nap when it's warm. She would have been scratched up pretty bad from part of the limb actually landing on that swing. So thankfully, the weather had gotten a little bit different, and it was windy and chilly, so she came in, and within about 40 minutes, that limb broke. Ooh, scary. Anyway, that's news from the local front here. Tonight we'll have clear skies with lows around 30, and winds will be out of the north at 5 to 10, and then mainly sunny skies tomorrow, highs in the mid-60s, and winds will be light and variable. Confirmed cases of coronavirus, though this is only from late Friday, now stand at 9,084, and confirmed deceased remains at 120. Pollen is still rated as none outside the window here in Rogue River proper, though I don't believe it. The air quality index is good at 41 parts per million, though that's bumping up towards the moderate range. And that daytime UV index is moderate, though it has ticked down one digit to 4. Barometric pressure is holding steady at 30.45 inches. Visibility is at 9 miles, and relative humidity in the area is at 82%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that are crowdsources from around the world. London is 67 and sunny. Paris is 72 and sunny. Oh, spring in Paris. Rome is 67 and sunny. Oh, spring at the Spanish Steps in Rome. Kyiv is 50 and partly cloudy. Kabul is 55 and fair. Hong Kong is 74 and partly cloudy. Tokyo is 62 and fair. Sydney, Australia is 66 and mostly cloudy. San Francisco, California is 46 degrees and sunny. And New York is 46 degrees Fahrenheit and mostly cloudy. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. Staff at Reuters brings us this burst amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. China generated 53% of the world's total coal-fired power in 2020, 9 percentage points more than 5 years earlier, despite climate pledges and the building of hundreds of renewable energy plants, a global data study showed. Although China added a record 71.7 gigawatts of wind power and 48.2 gigawatts of solar last year, it was the only G20 nation to see a significant jump in coal-fired generation. China's coal-fired generation rose by 1.7%, or 77 terawatt hours, enough to bring its share of global coal power to 53%, up from 44% in 2015. China has promised to reduce its dependence on coal and bring emissions of climate-warming greenhouse gas to a peak before 2030 and become carbon neutral by 2060.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière, la promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle, c'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Dennis Dumo of Reuters brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. The Sudanese government and a major rebel group from its southern Nuba Mountains on Sunday yesterday signed a document which paves the way for a final peace agreement by guaranteeing freedom of worship to all while separating religion and the state. Oh, how novel! The signing is viewed as a crucial step in efforts by the power-sharing government led by General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan to reach accords with rebel groups across the country and end decades of conflicts that left millions displaced and hundreds of thousands dead. Last year, Sudan signed a peace agreement with many groups, including from the western region of Darfur. But a key faction of the Sudan People's Liberation Movement North, led by Abdelaziz al-Hilu, did not join in last year's agreement because it stuck to its demand that Sudan dispenses with Sharia law and becomes a secular democratic state. Sharia law was first imposed in Sudan in 1983 and maintained by the now deposed President Omar al-Bashir for the duration of his 30-year-long Islamist rule. The declaration stated that both sides agreed to the establishment of a civil democratic federal state in Sudan, wherein the freedom of religion, the freedom of belief in religious practices and worship shall be guaranteed to all Sudanese people by separating the identities of culture, religion, ethnicity, and religion from the state. No religion shall be imposed on anyone, and the state shall not adopt an official religion, it said, without specifying that Sudan would become a secular state, a controversial issue in the country's transition. Well, that is a novel idea. I hope it works. And that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but you do know Netroots Radio will broadcast on, and we're going to meet up tomorrow for Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks. and we'll meet up here tomorrow, right here, in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Robe à fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goer. Je voudrais toujours te plaire, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair. T'embrasser les yeux ouverts, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum.